The South African Institute of Black Property Practitioners is calling on all role players in the construction sector to adhere to building rules and standards in order to protect people's lives in the aftermath of the George tragedy. To discuss this, we're joined by Fundiswa Mazibuko, President of the SA Institute of Black Property Practitioners. Fundiswa, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for speaking to us. I suppose a million questions remain unanswered about what should have been done, what wasn't done. So let's start there with, where are the holes in this entire debacle with this tragedy from a few weeks ago?
Good afternoon, and thank you for affording us the opportunity to give our inputs on this tragedy. I think at this stage it's difficult to tell what was not done right and where the loopholes. I think until a proper investigation has been undertaken and concluded, we'll be able to get facts. It's difficult at this stage to know exactly where they went wrong. All we know is that lives were lost, and it's really, really a sad time, and our hearts and prayers out to the families that have lost their loved ones.
Okay, so maybe let's start off with standard operating procedures, right? What are the specific building rules and standards that may or may not have been violated in the George building collapse? Or what are those things that needed to have been in place to ensure that tragedies such as this do not happen?
I think at this stage what we would need to ascertain is whether proper approvals were received and those processes were followed as per the CIDB, which is the regulatory body that would oversee that process. I think based on what we've heard on the news and we've read, we are of the view that the said contractor was apparently and allegedly not registered with CIDB. And I think based on that, there is a huge concern from our point of view, and I think from all the other regulatory bodies, where we find that people are not following the due processes. At this stage, I think based on what we've had, we are relying on hearsay really, and it's difficult to really comment on hearsay. At this stage, it does seem like there were processes that were not followed.
Now, whose responsibility is it to appoint the contractor in this instance?
It's the developer. It's the developer, and it does seem like they were a contractor of a certain developer, which I think they should have done their due diligence before appointing the said contractor and ensuring that they know their work, they are accredited, they have the right accreditations, they understand the impact of health and safety in these types of developments. And the developer, I think, would need to come out and maybe prove and give us facts in terms of what processes they followed to appoint this contractor.
Fundiswa, let's bring in the municipality into the picture. Now, I'd imagine that when the plans to put up a 5-story building are presented, the municipality makes certain approvals. Do these approvals come in at various stages of the project, assuming from before ground is broken until the building is complete? Because I'd imagine at the end of the construction there is some inspection. But let's talk about that process from when the building, when ground is broken until final stages. At what point does the municipality come in to check, if it does at all?
Whilst I may not really represent the municipality, but from my understanding is that once the plans are approved, the contractor has the right to then take ground and start with construction. However, there should be an engineer that approves at every stage before they move on to the next level and the next level. So I would also be keen to find out where their engineer was and whether they were there to approve this contractor as they were proceeding with the construction.
Now, here's where it all gets murky for me, right? Now, that is, when you're a private contractor, you might do all you can to cut back on costs, on expenses. You might cut a few corners, right? Mm-hmm. Now, if all of this is done by private enterprise, but potentially brings into harm's way the public, is this not a challenge? Is this not a loophole in the system?
I think what this has made all of us realize is that we need to work very closely with municipalities, with the engineers, and ensure that, we don't have the fly-by-night construction companies, because you see where we are today. I mean, many years ago, when I was younger, I remember there were even building inspectors, who would come randomly and check these projects and ensure that people are complying and they're adhering to the rules. So I do think that the reality is that it shows that we are all working in silos. We need to work in partnership with all players in the value chain. Adhere to the rules. I think the biggest thing is that cutting corners has cost lives, and that is really, really sad for the industry and for the families.
But what I'm not really understanding is the regulatory oversight, right? It would seem that the municipality leaves it to private enterprise to ensure that its own private business, which can have a repercussion on the public, because this building is going to be occupied by the public. The lives that have been lost are the lives of both citizens and non-citizens of South Africa. And there is nobody to hold that process to order or to account.
I mean, we all know that our municipalities are maybe under-resourced, and I mean, there was a time when a lot of our constituency members were struggling to even get their plans approved, right? So we know that there is a lot of deficiencies in the municipalities. However, I think as the industry, we need to now come up with solutions and ensure that we work with these contractors, construction companies, and we hold them to account. I think this is where the CIDB, I think even the Engineering Council, should come up and come with real solutions to this tragedy and ensure that this does not happen again.
Fundiswa, my last question comes to those nationals from other countries that were part of the contractors, and sadly, many of those lost their lives. Now, the recruitment or hiring of these individuals, generally speaking, in the industry, is it by the book? It would certainly seem not, because many of these individuals were undocumented. From the reports that we've seen, when they go through the schedule, some of those names weren't there. Some of these individuals didn't even come back after the building collapse. So suggesting that they obviously knew that they were illegal and shouldn't have been an employee. That responsibility, I'd imagine, is with the actual contractor.
That is really the biggest challenge that is faced by the industry, because I feel like construction companies and other businesses, even not in our industry alone, you see it in retail sector as well, there is this tendency of taking advantage of these people that are not South African, that are desperate, and they'll take anything because they need to feed themselves and their families. The system is now taking advantage of that opportunity. However, it goes back to our earlier conversation that if government is not ensuring that people take advantage of these loopholes, hold them to account and penalize them. In fact, send them to jail, because people's lives are at risk here. So it's important that we ensure that these opportunistic entrepreneurs not take advantage of people throughout this value chain.